The question on the table, as I'm sure a lot of startups go through themselves, let's say you have a $100,000 raise and you're pretty lean right here and you're trying to figure out how do I spend my money. What we're discussing right now is whether or not money should be spent on branding. So let's start with you, Sari. What do you think?
I think if you have $100,000, you should spend at least $5,000 to $10,000 of that on branding. And on a low level, you could get a decent brand consultant for $5,000. And if you actually want to go through a serious brand process, then you can spend up to $10,000. There's companies charge more. However, the bottom line is know who you are. Because if you do not know who you are, then you are not going to be able to sell yourself to investors. You're not going to be able to sell yourself to anybody who wants to partner with you. How are you going to build a serious advisory board? You cannot build a product without knowing who you are, because nobody is going to buy into you if you cannot convince them why you're giving them something of value.
Okay, but let me ask you this here, because I would think a lot of tech startups are walking around and they're saying, I know exactly who I am. I can absolutely explain that. Do you think that they could? Do you think that they could actually?
I think that once people really go through a branding process, they realize, in my experience, that they really don't know how to communicate themselves. And they often at times think that they're their own target audience, which is, Silicon Valley, a perfect example. Like, they're trying to market to these software developers, and then when they launched it to the public, nobody knew what to do with it, and they were dying. So, that's a perfect example.
Okay. Helene, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I think that there is definitely value in going through some sort of branding process, whether or not you hire a team or you go through the process internally. It's pretty important to come up with some sort of identity, because it helps you go through the process of really figuring out, as she said, who you are and what you're creating. And from my perspective, especially when you're out in front of investors, it's really important to be able to very quickly, you don't have an elevator pitch anymore. That's too long. You have 10 seconds to get someone's attention. If you don't have their attention in 10 seconds, your name is the first thing that they're going to hear. And then you go into a little bit of an explanation, and I think it forces entrepreneurs to go through the process of really honing in on what it is they're going to try and sell, and that will serve you very well in going out in front of investors, in my opinion.
Great point. Okay, Aaron, what do you think?
Okay, so considering I'm in charge, or my mindset is usually around making sure you guys don't belly up, and what that always means is you're out of money, you're dead. So considering that, you said $5,000 or $10,000. I have $100,000. Considering maybe I'm an engineer and I could really build my product or something, build that, and I have another person that's business, I'm thinking that collectively we can go ahead and do this. How can I spend as little money as possible and get as much return as possible, and possibly make you somehow a partner? Not necessarily maybe equity, but how can I engage with you to at least get me down this process where I can continue to build upon what I've already built?
Well, here's the thought process behind that, and I've actually seen this and advise people to do this, and you'd be surprised at how many people don't actually want to put in the time themselves. But I say, okay, look, you don't want to hire an agency yet, you're too early to hire an agency. There's so much information out there on how to create your brand. Hire somebody to consult with you a couple of hours a week, even at a high level of $150 an hour, and you're spending $300 a week or every 2 weeks, and do the work. Because a good brand strategist and a good brand consultant will say, okay, let's go through these questions, here's your homework, go do this, and come back to me and I'll evaluate it. And you don't understand how many times that has, the person who owns the company does not want to spend time on that, because they're not good at it and they don't understand it, and they want to focus on building their product. And I think that is ignorance. If you don't have the money to spend, then you better be able to wear more than one programming hat. You got to be a CEO, you got to be a brand expert, you have to know your brand inside out, you got to know your product inside out, you have to learn the law around what you're doing. You got to know. Otherwise, you got to have money to spend. Those are the two areas that I would really...
For first or even second time founders, I would agree.
Yeah.
And what I love about that is you can minimize your risk by spending a few hours, seeing if this person's worth it. $150, maybe this doesn't work out, versus $150, now I have a new partner in my business.
Yes, I would say this: be wary of someone who says you have to have a minimum 6-month contract. I get that a lot. I always say if someone's really confident in their work, they don't need you to agree to 6 months. Then you're gonna love what they do right off the bat.
Actually,
I'm
I
really
disagree.
against
I
those.
disagree with
Okay.
that.
I will say,
And I'll tell you why I disagree with that. The reason is that, I mean, not with a beginning startup, but I'm talking about somebody who's like a little bit more established. The reason I disagree with that is because in our industry, if less than 6 months, we can't actually produce what we need to show results. And we're talking about like, you know, we want to take you to launch. It's not just to develop your brand. So yes, I agree with that. Like when you're just beginning and you need like a basic brand, but in the whole aspect of, okay, we've maybe been funded 300,000, 500,000, we're getting up there and we're ready to launch, then, you know, a 6 month minimum is actually reasonable, because then we can't really do our job, because it takes a few months to do
my
that.
perspective on that, though, from a legal perspective, is there's no accountability for any kind of measuring whether you're delivering or not. And I've had this happen over and over again. I feel like when you're really confident in what you can do, that they're just going to like what you're doing, they're going to keep using you. The reality is, unless you're seriously cutting your costs and therefore you need them to stick with you, then it doesn't make sense to me because I have these contracts where basically it says you need 6 months and you can't terminate for 6 months. And I have rarely seen those contracts work out very well for these companies. And that the reality is, if you're delivering, they're just going to keep using you. And that's what usually happens. But the flip side is, these companies that get my earlier stage companies to sign these 6 months rarely wind up getting. Now, I'm not talking necessarily about branding. I'm just talking about you know, people who are going to get you a certain number of tweets and a certain number, whatever it is, followers or whatever. I have an issue with that.
But
From a
that's-
legal and a financial perspective, I would say be careful of signing on to terms, and if there's a financial cost to getting out of that term.
I still
Period.
disagree
And this is the
with that.
question of
I still don't,
deliverables.
yeah.
That has to be spelled out
Yeah.
at the beginning.
I mean,
What
we're
is it
always-
that you
yeah.
expect to do? And at least from the branding perspective, typically we're going to also look at your competition, and we're going to show you what's out there, which is going to enhance your pitch to investors anyway. This is what the market
But
is.
my question would be, what do you lose by, okay, so 3 months and we want to terminate because we don't feel like it's working out. So you've gotten paid for the 3 months. Why is it an issue for the company to be able to terminate? That's just my issue for a startup company. It becomes very problematic when they can't get out of something. You could even have a personality conflict. It's just not working in terms of the personalities.
You know,
That would be my
I
issue.
understand.
I would say it's an
that.
education perspective.
In our
right?
perspective, though, we're putting time and energy into something, and we know we can deliver. I don't want to waste my time and energy on something that's not going to actually go to market. It's not about money for us. It's about actually putting time and energy into something that's going to be successful. My energy is more important than money. So I'm not going to sit there for 3 months and then be like, you know, have a disgruntled. Usually for us, it doesn't happen that way. Like, all of our contracts are 6 months minimum and our clients are fine. But like, if there's you know, there's times where the client gets in a tizzy and is like, I'm out and whatever, and then, you know, we've put time and energy into something that he just jumps around, and people usually can jump around. The other issue is a conflict of interest, where they start working with one company and then they test them out, and then they go with another company and then they test them out, and they start pitting it against, like, you do a design, you do a design, you do a design, and we don't even know we're working against another company, and then they terminate the contract saying, no, we like these guys better.
Okay,
So
but
it's
Sarah,
a
let me
lot-
ask you, in the startup context.
But the money
if
really
we're
is an
talking about-
issue in the startup That's the
It
problem,
is.
is that for them, every dollar that they spend is really an issue, and they have
Right.
such a
Well,
small
that's what
amount
I'm
of
saying.
money.
Not in like we're
Not
talking
in this
about
one.
maybe bigger budgets,
But so let's say
yeah.
within the startup context, what do you think are deliverables a startup should expect out of a branding company?
Yeah.
What's the MVP deliverables, I would say?
Yeah, the most important is you're creating your brand strategy. So who you are, what your mission is, what your values are, what your philosophy is, what your service is, you're about, your brand position, where you stand in the industry, and then how you communicate. Those are the elements that you need to develop and understand and write out and freaking memorize and know off by heart and like live by, like breathe by.
Okay.
And then your logo, colors, and fonts. Those things are like, I think, the high level, you know, elements of creating the
And
brand.
Helene, would you agree in going to investors? Would you think that that would be absolute critical items?
Like I said, you know, as far as the look and feel from the investor perspective, it's not so much as far as the branding in terms of what is the name conveying, not just the product, but in terms of where you're going with the product is really important. Like I said, you have literally 10 seconds now to get someone's attention. If the name of your company or your product falls flat, you've lost them. They're not even going to listen. Like I've had this experience where the name of the company, everybody, they start looking off into the distance and you've already lost them. But as far as the other level, the nuance of the color and the logo and all that, that's less important at the early stages for the investor, but more what the name is conveying. And it also tells where your company is going. That I would say is
Gotcha.
important.
Okay. So to give an introduction to who our crowd is, let's talk about who our panelists are. So Helene.
Hi, I'm
can you
Helene
introduce yourself?
Pratsky. I don't know if we're recording.
Yeah, you are.
It's I've been 29 years a startup company lawyer and serial entrepreneur.
Hi, my name is Aaron Altamura. I am a CPA and have been a consultant CFO for the past 3 years. I've also founded a few organizations, and I live, eat, and sleep tech startups.
My name is Sari Gabe. I'm CEO and founder of U2R1 Media, a creative agency that's been in existence for 14 years. We're a multinational company, and obviously I'm a brand advocate.
In a very good way.
For sure. And I'm Twyla Monty, and I'm COO of U2R1 Media, and I've been in this business for 8 years myself. So totally agree with what Sarah's position is. So thanks for listening, everyone. And
And our panel
Kick
startup
ass.
is
Yes.
our panel name